Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. Cherry trees are a familiar presence in many parts of the world, known for both their seasonal blossoms and, in some varieties, the fruit they produce. They belong to a group of trees that follow a repeating yearly pattern shaped by climate, soil, and light. In this story, we explore how cherry trees grow, where they thrive, and how their yearly cycle begins, starting with the physical and environmental conditions that define them. And if you like stories like these, please like and subscribe. Cherry trees belong to the genus Prunus, a group that also includes plums, peaches, and almonds. Members of this genus share similar growth habits, wood structure, and reproductive patterns. Cherry trees can be divided broadly into two types. Some are grown for the edible cherries they produce, while others are grown mainly for their blossoms. Although these types are used differently, their basic biology remains closely related. Let's begin. Fruiting cherry trees are cultivated for the cherries that develop after flowering and pollination. These trees are managed to support fruit size, flavor, and yield. Ornamental flowering cherry trees, by contrast, are selected for the visual qualities of their blossoms, such as color, density, and timing. In many ornamental varieties, fruit production is minimal or absent, but the trees still follow the same internal processes that govern flowering and seasonal growth. Cherry trees are native to temperate regions of the Northern Hemisphere. These are areas where the year is divided clearly into warm and cold seasons. Across parts of Europe, Asia, and North America, cherry trees evolved under conditions where winters bring sustained cold and summers provide warmth and light. This contrast matters because winter cold holds the tree in dormancy, while warmer spring temperatures release buds into growth, setting the timing for flowering and the rest of the season. Cherry trees grow best in regions with distinct seasons. As autumn approaches and temperatures begin to fall, growth slows. Leaves lose chlorophyll, change color, and eventually drop from the branches. This leaf loss marks the transition into dormancy. Without leaves, the tree reduces its need for water and limits exposure to freezing damage. Dormancy is a protective state. During winter, visible growth stops, but the tree remains alive and responsive. Internal activity slows, conserving energy stored during the previous growing season. Buds that formed earlier remain sealed through winter, so brief warm spells do not force them to open before the season is stable enough to support new growth. Most cherry trees require a period of winter cold before they can flower or produce fruit. This requirement is measured in chill hours. This represents the cumulative number of hours spent at low temperatures during winter. Each cherry variety has its own chill hour range, shaped by its genetic background and place of origin. When a cherry tree receives enough chill hours, buds are primed to open more evenly once spring temperatures rise. If this cold requirement is not met, development can be disrupted. Buds may open unevenly, late or not at all. Flowering may be sparse or irregular, affecting both ornamental display and fruit production. Soil conditions strongly influence cherry tree health. Cherry trees prefer well-drained soil that allows water to move through easily. Their roots need access to oxygen as well as moisture. When soil drains poorly and remains saturated, water fills air spaces in the soil, and oxygen around the roots falls, limiting root function. Cherry trees do not tolerate waterlogged roots. Extended exposure to excess moisture can stress the tree and make it more vulnerable to disease. Root systems function best when water is available, but excess moisture can drain away, because roots need oxygen as well as moisture to keep absorbing nutrients steadily. Sunlight is another critical factor. Cherry trees grow best in full sun, receiving direct light for most of the day. Sun exposure supports leaf development, strengthens branches, and fuels energy production through photosynthesis. In fruiting cherry trees, sunlight also influences sweetness because sugars formed in the leaves are moved into developing fruit as it grows. Cherry trees vary in physical structure. Some develop a single main trunk that rises upward before branching, while others grow with multiple stems emerging from near the base. These forms affect how light moves through the canopy and how weight is distributed across branches. Structure also influences how the tree responds to wind, rain, and future growth. Cherry trees are deciduous. Each year, they shed their leaves as part of their normal cycle. Leaf drop reduces the surface area exposed to cold air and limits moisture loss during winter. Bare branches allow snow and ice to pass through more easily, reducing the risk of breakage under winter conditions. Throughout winter, the tree remains prepared for the return of growth. Energy stored in the roots and wood is held in reserve. As daylight lengthens and temperatures rise, internal processes accelerate. This shift happens quickly once conditions align. In early spring, stored energy moves upward from the roots into the branches. Buds swell as cells divide and tissues expand. Growth resumes rapidly, especially after winters that fully satisfy chill hour requirements. This period marks the end of dormancy and the start of visible change. Cherry blossoms usually appear before the leaves have fully emerged. Flowers open while branches are still mostly bare, allowing them to receive maximum sunlight during early development. Leaves follow soon after, expanding as temperatures continue to rise. This sequence supports efficient use of early spring conditions. This early phase of growth reflects months of preparation shaped by climate, soil, light, and structure. The way a cherry tree enters spring depends on how winter unfolded and how well its basic needs were met. These conditions set the foundation for everything that follows in the growing season. Cherry blossoms are one of the most recognizable features of cherry trees, yet their appearance is brief and tightly controlled by environmental conditions. After months of dormancy, flower buds that formed during the previous growing season begin to open as temperatures rise. This shift happens quickly, and within a short window, the tree moves from bare branches to full bloom. Cherry blossoms usually appear before the leaves have fully emerged. Flower buds open first, while leaf buds remain smaller and slower to expand. This sequence allows flowers to receive maximum light during early development, before leaves begin to shade the branches. The timing also helps expose blossoms clearly to pollinating insects moving through the landscape in early spring. The bloom period is short. In many cherry trees, blossoms last only 1 to 2 weeks. Individual flowers may remain open for just a few days before petals begin to fall. This brief flowering window is the result of how cherry trees balance energy use. Flowers are delicate structures, and maintaining them for long periods would require resources that the tree instead directs toward fruit development or leaf growth. Cherry blossoms range in color from white to pale pink. The exact shade depends on the variety, but temperature also plays a role. Cooler spring temperatures can deepen blossom color slightly, producing richer pink tones. Warmer conditions tend to result in lighter blooms. These color variations reflect changes in pigment development during flower formation. Each cherry blossom contains both male and female reproductive parts. Inside the flower, pollen is produced by the male structures, while the female structure contains the ovary that can develop into fruit if pollination occurs. Although the flower carries both components, many cherry varieties still require pollen from a different tree to produce fruit. Cross-pollination is common among cherry trees. Pollen must be transferred from the flower of one compatible variety to another for fertilization to succeed. This exchange increases genetic diversity and supports reliable fruit development. Even ornamental cherry trees that do not produce significant fruit still rely on the same basic pollination process during flowering. Bees are the primary pollinators of cherry trees. As bees move from flower to flower, collecting nectar and pollen, they carry pollen grains between blossoms. Early spring flowering means cherry trees depend heavily on pollinators that are active as soon as temperatures allow. The timing of bloom must align closely with insect activity for pollination to occur. Weather conditions during bloom have a strong influence on pollination success. Cold temperatures can slow insect movement, reducing pollen transfer. Rainy weather can wash pollen away or prevent bees from flying altogether. When poor weather coincides with the short bloom window, fruit set can be reduced significantly. Successful pollination triggers rapid changes within the flower. Once fertilization occurs, petals begin to drop and the ovary starts to expand. Energy shifts away from maintaining the flower and toward developing the fruit. This transition happens quickly, often within days of pollination. Cherries grow quickly once pollinated. Cells divide and expand as the fruit begins to form around the developing seed. Early fruit growth is rapid, supported by energy produced in the leaves as they begin to expand. The tree directs water, sugars, and nutrients toward the forming cherries. Cherries are classified as drupes, or stone fruits. Each cherry contains a single hard pit at its center. This pit surrounds and protects the seed inside. The fleshy outer portion develops around the pit, forming the edible part of the fruit. The pit plays a protective role. As the fruit grows, the hard shell shields the developing seed from physical damage. This structure is common across many members of the genus Prunus and reflects a shared evolutionary strategy for seed protection. Cherry varieties are often grouped as sweet or tart. Sweet cherries are usually eaten fresh, with higher sugar content and a softer texture. Tart cherries have a more acidic flavor and are more often used in cooking and baking. Tart varieties also contain higher levels of certain antioxidants. This influences how they are used rather than how they grow. Cherry skin color ranges from yellow to deep red. Color development is influenced by variety and growing conditions. Darker cherries generally have higher sugar content, as pigment development and sugar accumulation occur together during ripening. Lighter colored cherries tend to be milder in flavor. Cherries do not continue to ripen after harvest. Once they are removed from the tree, sugar levels and flavor remain fixed. This makes harvest timing critical. Picking too early results in underdeveloped flavor, while waiting too long increases the risk of fruit damage or loss. Because cherries mature quickly, the window for harvest is narrow. Growers monitor color, firmness, and sugar content closely. Weather during this period also matters. Rain close to harvest can cause cherries to split, while excessive heat can stress the tree and affect fruit quality. Cherry trees are sensitive to late spring frost. Blossoms and young fruit are particularly vulnerable to freezing temperatures. A sudden cold snap during bloom can damage flowers, preventing pollination or killing developing tissue. This risk is one of the challenges of early flowering. In some growing regions, orchards use wind machines or water sprays to reduce frost damage. Wind machines mix warmer air from above with colder air near the ground, raising temperatures around the trees. Water sprays protect blossoms by releasing heat as water freezes. This helps keep blossom tissue closer to a stable temperature during short, cold spells. These protective measures highlight how narrow the margin can be between successful fruit development and loss. The brief bloom period, dependence on pollinators, and sensitivity to weather all combine to make flowering one of the most critical stages in the cherry tree's annual cycle. Once pollination and early fruit development are complete, the tree shifts its focus. Leaves expand fully, increasing energy production. Branches support growing fruit, and the tree enters a period of sustained growth. The result of the flowering stage sets how many cherries begin developing. This then determines how much water and sugar the tree must move into fruit through the rest of the season. Throughout this process, timing remains central. From the moment blossoms open to the point when petals fall and fruit begins to form, each step follows closely on the last. The cherry tree's success depends on how smoothly these transitions occur under changing spring conditions. After pollination has succeeded, the cherry begins to form quickly. The flower that was open during bloom starts to change. Petals drop away, and the small structure at the center begins to swell as fruit development gets underway. What follows is a fast sequence of physical changes, with the tree directing water and nutrients into a growing fruit in a short seasonal window. A cherry is classified as a drupe. This is also described as a stone fruit. This means the fruit develops with one hard pit inside. Early in development, the pit begins as a softer core, then hardens into a firm shell. The pit sits in the middle of the fruit and surrounds the seed. As the pit hardens, it protects the seed inside from pressure and damage, while the outer fruit continues to expand around it. As that hard center forms, the surrounding flesh develops around it. The softer tissue increases in volume as cells expand, and the fruit becomes heavier as it holds more water. The skin stretches over the surface, maintaining the rounded shape as the cherry grows. This stage is quick, and cherries are known to grow rapidly once pollinated, with visible change over a relatively short time. The pit remains a constant reference point during this growth. It does not swell in the same way as the flesh, because its role is to form a hard barrier around the seed. The flesh builds outward from that barrier, and the space between pit and skin becomes the edible part of the fruit. When the pit is fully hard, it is a rigid center that the soft tissues surround. Cherry trees produce both sweet and tart cherries, and these categories are linked to how the fruit is used. Sweet cherries are usually eaten fresh. They are selected for flavor and texture that works well straight from the tree. Tart cherries are more often used for cooking and baking. Their sharper taste holds up when heat is applied, and their flavor can remain distinct when combined with other ingredients. Tart cherries are also noted for containing higher levels of certain antioxidants. That difference is part of why tart cherries are often associated with cooking and baking uses, rather than being eaten fresh in large quantities. Even so, sweet and tart cherries share the same physical structure of skin, flesh, pit, and seed, formed through the same rapid development after pollination. As cherries develop, the skin color shifts toward its mature tone. Cherry skin can range from yellow to deep red, depending on the variety. Color builds as the fruit approaches maturity, and the surface becomes more saturated and uniform. In many cases, darker cherries generally have higher sugar content. As the skin deepens in color, the fruit is often also moving toward a sweeter taste because sugar levels rise as development completes. This is also the period when timing becomes sensitive. Cherries do not continue to ripen after harvest. Once a cherry is picked, it will not become sweeter or more developed in flavor. The fruit you harvest is the fruit you will eat. That is why harvest timing is critical. Picking too early locks in a less developed result, while waiting too long can mean the fruit passes its best stage while still on the tree. The need for precision is clear when you look at how quickly cherries change near maturity. Color can deepen over a narrow period, especially in varieties that finish in a deep red. Sweetness can rise at the same time, and the flesh is nearing its final texture. The pit is already hard by this point, and the fruit is carrying a large amount of water in its tissues. Small differences in timing can therefore lead to noticeable differences in flavor and texture, particularly for sweet cherries that are usually eaten fresh, where sweetness and texture are central. Water is central throughout fruit development. Water needs increase during fruit development because the fruit is expanding and holding more volume. Water supports the physical size of the cherry and helps maintain steady growth from early formation to harvest. When water supply is consistent, the fruit can develop toward its expected size and firmness without repeated stress that interrupts expansion. Drought stress can reduce fruit size. When the tree cannot move enough water into the developing cherries, expansion slows. The fruit may remain smaller, and the overall result can be less satisfying in size and texture. This is a direct physical limit. Without enough water, the cells in the flesh cannot expand to the same extent, and the cherry cannot reach the same fullness. Overwatering has its own effect. Overwatering can dilute flavor because the fruit may take on extra water without a matching increase in sugars. The cherry can look full and well-formed, yet taste less concentrated. This matters most near the end of development, when the relationship between mature skin color and sugar content is becoming most noticeable, and the final flavor is being set. By the time harvest approaches, the key features of the cherry are all present and clear. The fruit is a drupe, with a single hard pit protecting a seed. The skin has reached its mature range of color, from yellow in some varieties to deep red in others. Sweet cherries are ready to be eaten fresh, while tart cherries are suited for cooking and baking, and tart types are noted for higher levels of certain antioxidants. What remains is the decision of timing, because cherries do not ripen further once they have been removed from the tree. Harvest is therefore the final step in fruit development. The timing fixes the sweetness, the texture, and the overall experience of the fruit. With cherries, the tree completes its work before the fruit leaves the branch, and the moment of picking sets what that cherry will be. Cherry trees require ongoing care to remain productive and healthy over many years. As the tree grows, its structure becomes more complex, and the way air, light, and weight move through the canopy begins to matter more. Management practices focus on shaping this structure so the tree can support growth without becoming stressed or damaged. Regular pruning is an important part of cherry tree care. Pruning involves removing selected branches to guide how the tree grows. By thinning crowded areas and removing poorly positioned limbs, pruning improves air circulation throughout the canopy. Better airflow helps leaves and branches dry more quickly after rain. This reduces conditions that favor disease. Light penetration is another reason pruning is necessary. When branches become too dense, inner sections of the tree receive less sunlight. Leaves in shaded areas produce less energy. This can affect overall growth and fruit quality. By opening the canopy, pruning allows sunlight to reach more of the tree, supporting balanced development. Cherry trees are prone to several fungal diseases. These organisms thrive in damp, still conditions where moisture lingers on leaves and wood. When humidity is high and airflow is limited, fungal spores can establish more easily. Managing the canopy through pruning helps reduce this risk by creating a drier environment within the tree. Climate plays a role in disease pressure. Dry climates are often ideal for cherry production because lower humidity limits fungal growth. In wetter regions, careful site selection and pruning become even more important. Trees planted in open areas with good air movement are less likely to experience prolonged moisture on their surfaces. Soil health strongly influences fruit quality and overall tree strength. Nutrients in the soil support leaf growth, fruit development, and root function. When soil nutrients are balanced, the tree can maintain steady growth without excessive stress. Poor soil conditions can limit nutrient uptake and weaken the tree over time. Cherry trees require balanced nutrients. Too much nitrogen encourages leaf growth at the expense of fruit production. Excessive leafy growth can also increase shading and reduce airflow, creating conditions that favor disease. Balanced fertilization supports both vegetative growth and fruit development without overwhelming the tree. Soil testing helps guide proper fertilization. By measuring nutrient levels, growers can adjust inputs to meet the tree's needs without excess. This approach supports long-term soil health and helps prevent problems caused by nutrient imbalance. Cherry trees grow relatively fast compared to many other fruit trees. Their rapid growth allows them to establish quickly, but it also means their wood can develop certain characteristics. Cherry wood is strong, but it can be brittle, especially under heavy loads. Heavy fruit loads can place significant weight on branches. When too many cherries develop at once, branches may bend or break under the strain. This risk increases when fruit is concentrated toward the ends of limbs or when branches are long and poorly supported. Proper pruning helps manage weight distribution. By shortening branches and encouraging balanced growth, pruning reduces leverage and spreads weight more evenly across the tree. This helps branches support fruit without breaking and preserves the overall structure of the tree. Birds are strongly attracted to ripe cherries. As fruit reaches maturity, its color and sweetness make it highly visible and appealing to wildlife. Birds can consume large amounts of fruit in a short time, reducing harvest yields. To protect crops, netting is often used. Nets placed over trees create a physical barrier that prevents birds from reaching the fruit. This method allows cherries to remain on the tree until harvest without relying on deterrents that may lose effectiveness over time. Cherry trees can be grafted to control size and vigor. Grafting involves joining a cherry variety to a selected rootstock. The rootstock influences how large the tree grows, how quickly it establishes, and how it responds to soil conditions. Rootstock choice affects disease resistance as well. Some rootstocks are selected for their ability to tolerate certain soil-borne diseases or challenging soil conditions. By choosing appropriate rootstocks, growers can improve tree resilience and longevity. Dwarf cherry trees are easier to harvest. Their smaller size allows fruit to be reached without ladders and makes pruning and netting more manageable. Smaller trees are often preferred in high-density plantings where space efficiency matters. Larger cherry trees often produce higher total yields. With more branches and leaf area, they can support more fruit overall. However, their size also makes them more challenging to manage, requiring careful pruning and harvesting techniques. Mulching benefits cherry trees by helping regulate soil temperature and moisture. A layer of mulch reduces evaporation, keeping moisture available to the roots during dry periods. It also moderates soil temperature, protecting roots from extreme heat or cold. Cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow. Because much of the root system occupies the upper layers of soil, it is sensitive to changes in moisture and temperature. Shallow roots benefit from mulching. This creates a more stable environment near the soil surface. Soil compaction can harm cherry tree health. When soil becomes compacted, air spaces are reduced, limiting oxygen availability to the roots. Compaction also restricts water movement, leading to poor drainage or uneven moisture distribution. Avoiding heavy traffic near the tree helps preserve soil structure. Over time, these management practices shape how the tree grows and performs. Pruning, soil care, and protection from damage work together to support steady growth. Each decision affects how the tree handles stress, supports fruit, and maintains its structure year after year. As cherry trees mature, the way growth is matched to what branches and roots can physically support becomes increasingly important. Healthy trees reflect consistent care, with branches strong enough to bear fruit and roots functioning efficiently in the soil. This balance allows the tree to continue producing while remaining resilient. Cherry trees play a role beyond fruit production and seasonal display. As they mature, they become part of a wider network of living organisms and physical processes that extend through the landscape. Their presence influences wildlife, soil, and long-term land use, and their own lifespan reflects years of interaction with changing conditions. Once mature, cherry trees can produce fruit for decades. Fruiting varieties often reach maturity between 4 and 7 years, after which they may continue to bear fruit year after year. With proper care and suitable conditions, a productive cherry tree can remain in cultivation for 30 to 50 years. Some ornamental varieties live even longer, particularly when grown in favorable environments with minimal stress. Cherry trees grow relatively fast compared to many other fruit trees. This rapid growth allows them to establish quickly, forming strong trunks and branches in a relatively short time. The wood that develops is dense and smooth, contributing to the tree's stability while it is growing. At the same time, this wood has characteristics that influence how the tree interacts with its environment. Cherry wood is valued for its appearance and workability. It has a fine, smooth grain and a rich natural color. As the wood ages and is exposed to light, it darkens gradually, developing deeper tones over time. These qualities make cherry wood desirable for furniture, musical instruments, and interior finishes. The same structural traits that support the living tree also contribute to the properties of the harvested wood. In natural and cultivated settings, cherry trees support a range of living organisms. Their role in early spring ecosystems is especially important. When many other plants are still dormant, cherry blossoms provide a source of food for pollinators. Bees and other insects rely on these early flowers for nectar and pollen, supporting their activity at the start of the season. Leaves that emerge after flowering support various insect species. As insects feed on leaves or shelter within the canopy, they become part of a broader food web. Birds feed on insects drawn to the tree, while other animals interact with the tree at different stages of the year. These interactions connect cherry trees to surrounding plant and animal communities. Fallen cherries also contribute to local ecosystems. Fruit that drops to the ground becomes food for birds, small mammals, and insects. This transfer of energy from tree to wildlife supports biodiversity and nutrient cycling. As fruit and leaves break down, nutrients return to the soil, enriching the environment around the tree. In orchards, cherry trees are part of complex food webs. Even in managed settings, a wide range of organisms interact with the trees. Soil organisms break down organic matter, insects move through the canopy, and birds respond to seasonal changes in fruit availability. The health of the trees influences the balance of these interactions. Healthy cherry trees contribute to healthy landscapes. Their roots help stabilize soil, reducing erosion in areas where trees are well established. Leaf litter adds organic material to the soil, improving structure and moisture retention. Over time, the presence of trees shapes the physical and biological character of the land. Cherry trees have been cultivated for thousands of years. Historical records show that they were grown in ancient Greece and Rome, where both fruiting and ornamental forms were valued. Through trade and migration, cherry cultivation spread across Europe and Asia. Over time, varieties were selected and refined to suit different climates and uses. Japan is especially well known for ornamental cherry trees. Large numbers of flowering varieties have been cultivated and preserved for their blossoms. Seasonal viewing of cherry blossoms has become closely associated with these trees, reflecting long-standing attention to their flowering cycle rather than their fruit. The trees themselves respond to the same physical conditions as other cherry varieties, even though their cultural role differs. Cherry trees are often associated with renewal and impermanence because of their brief bloom. This association reflects the visible rhythm of the tree's seasonal cycle. The short flowering period mirrors the rapid transition from winter dormancy to active growth. While these ideas are cultural interpretations, the underlying pattern comes from the tree's biology and climate response. Cherry trees respond strongly to climate conditions. Changes in temperature patterns can shift bloom timing, sometimes causing blossoms to open earlier than expected. Warming winters can reduce chill hour accumulation, disrupting flowering and fruit development. These shifts affect both ornamental displays and agricultural production. Climate changes are affecting traditional growing regions. Areas that once provided reliable winter cold may no longer meet chill hour requirements consistently. In response, growers adjust varieties, management practices, or planting locations. The tree's sensitivity to seasonal patterns makes it a clear indicator of environmental change. A mature cherry tree reflects years of seasonal cycles. Each year's growth is shaped by weather conditions, water availability, and soil health. Over time, the tree records this history in its growth rings. Wider rings may reflect favorable growing seasons, while narrower rings indicate periods of stress. Cherry trees link food production with visual presence. Fruiting trees provide harvests that depend on careful timing and environmental balance. Ornamental trees contribute to landscapes through their form and seasonal changes. In both cases, the tree's value comes from how it responds to the conditions around it. Their yearly pattern of growth and rest is highly visible. From bare branches in winter to blossoms in spring, full leaves in summer, and leaf drop in autumn, cherry trees mark the passage of the year clearly. This visible cycle connects the tree's internal processes to the surrounding environment, showing how growth, rest, and renewal repeat over time. Cherry trees have a long history of cultivation that stretches back thousands of years. Long before modern orchards or ornamental plantings existed, people selected and propagated cherry trees for both their fruit and their appearance. These early choices shaped how cherry trees spread and how different varieties became established in new regions. Cherry trees were grown in ancient Greece and Rome, where they were valued as a food source. Fruiting varieties were cultivated in gardens and agricultural settings, supported by climates that provided the cold winters and warm summers the trees require. Through trade routes and migration, cherry trees moved beyond their native ranges and became part of managed landscapes across Europe and Asia. As cherry cultivation spread, different regions selected trees suited to local conditions. Over time, this led to a wide range of varieties adapted to different climates, soils, and uses. Some were selected for reliable fruit production, while others were valued for their flowering characteristics. These choices reflected practical needs as well as aesthetic preferences, but they were always grounded in how the trees responded physically to their environment. Japan became especially well known for ornamental cherry trees. Large numbers of flowering varieties were cultivated and preserved for their blossoms rather than for fruit. These trees were selected for traits such as blossom color, shape, and timing. Despite their ornamental role, they follow the same biological processes as fruiting cherry trees, including dormancy, chill hour requirements, and spring flowering. Seasonal cherry blossom viewing developed around the predictable timing of bloom. Because cherry blossoms are short-lived, their appearance marks a narrow window in the spring. This timing is determined by winter cold accumulation and rising spring temperatures, not by cultural preference. The trees respond to climate conditions first, and human activities follow that natural schedule. Cherry trees are often associated with renewal and impermanence because their blooms appear briefly before petals fall. This association arises from the visible contrast between long periods of dormancy and sudden flowering. The tree spends months without leaves or flowers, then shifts rapidly into bloom. The short duration of this stage highlights how quickly the tree moves through its annual cycle. This visible rhythm reflects the tree's underlying biology. Buds formed during the previous growing season remain dormant through winter, protected from cold. Once chill hour requirements are met and temperatures rise, those buds open quickly. The rapid transition from bare branches to flowering is the result of internal processes responding to environmental cues. Cherry trees respond strongly to changes in climate. Because their growth cycle depends on winter cold, followed by gradual warming, shifts in temperature patterns can alter bloom timing. Warmer winters may reduce chill hour accumulation, causing trees to flower later, unevenly, or not at all. In some cases, blooms may appear earlier than expected, increasing the risk of frost damage. Warming winters are already affecting traditional growing regions. Areas that once provided consistent winter cold may now experience milder conditions that fail to meet chill hour requirements. This disrupts flowering and fruit development, affecting both agricultural production and ornamental displays. Trees that rely on predictable seasonal signals struggle when those signals become unreliable. Climate shifts are also influencing where cherry trees can be grown successfully. Growers may move orchards to higher elevations or cooler regions to maintain suitable conditions. Others may select varieties with lower chill hour requirements. These adjustments reflect the tree's sensitivity to temperature and its dependence on seasonal structure. Cherry trees require balanced nutrients throughout their lifespan. Soil conditions influence how well the tree can respond to environmental stress. When nutrients are available in appropriate amounts, the tree can support growth, flowering, and recovery from challenging conditions. Poor nutrition can limit resilience, making the tree more vulnerable to climate-related stress. Water availability continues to play a role across years. Adequate water supports leaf growth and energy production, while drought stress can weaken the tree over time. Because cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow, they respond quickly to changes in soil moisture. This sensitivity makes them responsive indicators of shifting environmental conditions. Over many seasons, a mature cherry tree reflects its growing history. Each year's conditions influence how much growth occurs. Weather patterns, water availability, and soil health all leave physical traces in the tree's structure. Growth rings record this history, with variations in width, showing periods of favorable or stressful conditions. These growth patterns provide a physical record of environmental change. Wider rings indicate seasons with sufficient resources and stable conditions. Narrower rings reflect years when growth was limited by cold, drought, or other stressors. The tree's structure becomes a long-term archive of its interaction with the environment. Cherry trees link food production with visual presence in landscapes. Fruiting trees support agriculture, while ornamental trees shape parks and streetscapes. In both roles, the tree's value comes from its predictable yearly pattern of growth and rest and its responsiveness to climate. The same biological processes support both uses. The yearly pattern of growth and rest of cherry trees remains highly visible. From leafless branches in winter to blossoms in spring, dense foliage in summer, and leaf drop in autumn, the tree marks time clearly. Each stage follows from the last, guided by temperature, light, and water. As climates continue to shift, this rhythm may change in subtle ways. Flowering may occur earlier or later. Fruit development may face new challenges. The tree's strong response to environmental conditions makes it a clear example of how plants adjust or struggle to adjust to changing patterns. Through centuries of cultivation and observation, cherry trees have remained closely tied to the seasons. Their growth, flowering, and rest depend on a balance that is easily disrupted but also carefully recorded in their structure. This connection between tree and environment continues to shape how cherry trees are grown, valued, and understood today. Cherry trees continue to interact with their environment long after flowering and fruiting have passed. As the growing season progresses, attention shifts away from blossoms and cherries and toward the long-term processes that sustain the tree itself. These processes unfold gradually and shape how the tree carries the effects of one season into the next. As leaves expand fully, they become the primary sites of energy production. Through photosynthesis, leaves convert sunlight into sugars that support growth and maintenance. Some of this energy is used immediately to sustain the canopy and support branch development. Excess energy is transported and stored within the tree, forming reserves that will later support dormancy and the following spring's growth. Cherry tree roots play a central role in this storage process. Although the roots remain relatively shallow, they extend outward through the upper layers of soil, absorbing water and nutrients. These resources move upward through the trunk and branches, while sugars produced in the leaves move downward and are stored in roots and woody tissue. This exchange continues steadily throughout the growing season. Because cherry tree roots remain close to the surface, Soil conditions strongly influence long-term health. Soil compaction can limit the movement of air and water, restricting root function. When soil becomes compressed, oxygen availability decreases, and water may drain unevenly. This can lead to stress even when rainfall appears sufficient. Maintaining loose, well-structured soil supports consistent root activity. Mulching helps protect this shallow root system. A layer of mulch reduces evaporation, helping soil retain moisture during warm periods. It also buffers temperature changes, keeping roots cooler during heat and warmer during cold snaps. By moderating conditions near the surface, mulch creates a more stable environment for root function. As the season advances, branches that carried fruit earlier now support leaf growth and new wood formation. Cherry trees grow relatively fast compared to many fruit trees, and this growth adds new layers of tissue each year. The wood that forms during this period contributes to the tree's overall strength and structure. Cherry wood develops with a smooth grain and a dense texture. While strong, it can also be brittle, especially in branches that grew quickly or carried heavy fruit loads earlier in the season. This combination of strength and brittleness influences how branches respond to wind and weight. Careful pruning in previous seasons helps distribute growth more evenly, reducing stress on individual limbs. As leaves continue to function through summer, the tree prepares for future stages. Buds that will open the following spring begin forming along branches. These buds remain small and tightly sealed, containing the structures that will later become flowers or leaves. Their formation depends on the tree having sufficient energy and stable conditions during the current season. Water availability remains important throughout this period. Consistent moisture supports leaf activity and bud formation. Extended drought can limit energy production and reduce the number or quality of buds formed for the next year. Over time, repeated stress during this stage can affect flowering and fruiting in future seasons. As summer gives way to autumn, changes in daylight and temperature signal another transition. Leaf activity slows, and the tree begins reclaiming nutrients from its foliage. Chlorophyll breaks down, revealing other pigments before leaves fall. This process allows the tree to conserve valuable nutrients and redirect them into storage. Leaf drop marks the return toward dormancy. Without leaves, the tree's demand for water decreases sharply. Energy production slows, and internal processes prepare for winter conditions. Branches harden, buds seal more tightly, and the tree enters a period of rest. Throughout this cycle, cherry trees maintain a close relationship with surrounding organisms. Leaves that fall to the ground become organic matter, contributing to soil structure as they decompose. Microorganisms break down this material, releasing nutrients back into the soil where they can be reused by the tree's roots. In both cultivated and natural settings, this recycling supports long-term soil health. Healthy soil promotes steady growth and resilience. Over many years, the presence of cherry trees can gradually improve soil quality through repeated cycles of leaf drop and decomposition. As seasons repeat, the tree's structure records its history. Each year of growth adds a new ring of wood. These rings vary in width, depending on conditions during that year. Ample water and favorable temperatures lead to wider rings, while stress from drought or cold results in narrower ones. These growth rings provide a physical record of environmental conditions. They show how the tree responded to variations in climate, water availability, and soil health over time. the trunk becomes an archive of past seasons, preserving evidence of both favorable periods and challenges. Cherry trees can live for decades in cultivation. Fruiting trees commonly reach 30 to 50 years of age, while some ornamental varieties live even longer. Over this lifespan, the tree experiences countless cycles of growth, dormancy, and renewal. Each cycle builds upon the last, shaping the tree's form and function. As trees age, management practices continue to influence their health. Pruning, soil care, and protection from damage help maintain the way growth is matched to what branches and roots can physically support. Older trees that receive consistent care often remain productive and structurally sound well into maturity. Through repeated seasons, cherry trees demonstrate how long-term processes depend on steady conditions rather than single events. Flowering and fruiting draw attention, but it is the quieter work of energy storage, root function, and wood formation that sustains the tree year after year. By the end of each growing season, the cherry tree has already begun preparing for the next. Buds are set, energy is stored, and tissues are strengthened. This ongoing preparation ensures that when winter passes and spring returns, the tree is ready to repeat its cycle once more. Cherry trees also show clear variation depending on where and how they are grown. Differences in climate, soil, and management shape how trees develop, how much fruit they produce, and how they respond to stress. These variations show up physically in branch structure, timing of bud opening, and how the tree uses water, light, and soil in a particular place. One important source of variation comes from regional climate. Cherry trees grown in cooler regions experience longer winters and slower spring warming. In these conditions, chill hour requirements are often met fully, leading to more uniform flowering. Trees in warmer regions may accumulate fewer chill hours. This can result in delayed or uneven bloom. These differences affect not only flowering, but the entire rhythm of the growing season. Soil conditions also vary widely across growing regions. Some cherry trees grow in deep, well-structured soils that allow roots to spread easily and drain excess water. Others grow in heavier soils that retain moisture for longer periods. Trees in heavier soils may face greater risk of waterlogging, especially during wet seasons, while trees in lighter soils may require more careful water management to avoid drought stress. Because cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow, these soil differences are especially important. Roots concentrated near the surface respond quickly to changes in moisture and temperature. In soils that compact easily, root growth may be restricted, limiting nutrient uptake and reducing overall vigor. In well-aerated soils, roots function more efficiently, supporting steady growth above ground. Variation also appears in how cherry trees are trained and shaped. Some are grown as larger, spreading trees with wide canopies. Others are managed to remain smaller and more compact. These differences affect how light moves through the canopy, how fruit is distributed, and how easily the tree can be maintained. Tree size influences yield. Larger cherry trees often produce higher total yields because they have more branches and leaf area to support fruit development. However, their size also makes them more difficult to manage. Pruning, harvesting, and protection from birds become more complex as trees grow taller and broader. Smaller or dwarf cherry trees are easier to harvest and manage. Their reduced height allows fruit to be reached without extensive equipment, and canopy management becomes more precise. These trees often produce less total fruit than larger trees, but their efficiency and ease of care make them valuable in certain settings, The choice of rootstock plays a central role in determining tree size and growth behavior. Cherry trees are often grafted, with the fruiting or flowering variety joined to a selected rootstock. The rootstock influences how vigorous the tree becomes, how quickly it establishes, and how it responds to soil conditions. Rootstock selection can also affect disease resistance. Some rootstocks are chosen because they tolerate specific soil-borne diseases or challenging soil environments better than others. By selecting appropriate rootstocks, growers can improve tree survival and long-term performance under local conditions. Variation is also seen in how cherry trees respond to humidity. In regions with high humidity, fungal diseases are more likely to develop. Trees in these environments require careful pruning and spacing to maintain airflow. In drier climates, disease pressure is often lower, and trees may require less intensive management to remain healthy. Weather patterns within a single growing season can create noticeable differences from year to year. A cool, wet spring may slow growth and increase disease risk, while a warm, dry spring can accelerate development. These conditions influence flowering timing, fruit set, and early growth, leaving lasting effects on the season's outcome. Even within the same orchard, individual trees may respond differently. Slight differences in soil depth, drainage, or exposure to wind and sun can lead to variation in growth and fruit quality. Trees located in low-lying areas may experience colder air and higher frost risk, while those on gentle slopes may warm earlier in spring. Cherry trees also vary in how they allocate resources. Some trees direct more energy toward vegetative growth, producing longer shoots and denser canopies. Others allocate more energy toward fruit development. This balance is influenced by pruning history, nutrient availability, and water supply, as well as by the tree's genetic background. Bird pressure can vary by location as well. Trees near hedgerows or wooded areas may experience heavier bird activity during fruit ripening. In more open settings, bird pressure may be lower. These differences influence whether netting or other protective measures are needed and how effective they are. Over time, repeated exposure to local conditions shapes each tree. Growth patterns adjust to prevailing winds, typical rainfall, and seasonal temperature ranges. Branches develop in response to light availability and past pruning decisions. The resulting form reflects years of interaction with a specific environment. These variations highlight how cherry trees are shaped by place. While their basic biology remains consistent, the details of their growth differ depending on climate, soil, and management choices. Understanding these differences allows trees to be matched more effectively to their surroundings, supporting healthier growth and more reliable performance. Across regions and seasons, cherry trees demonstrate flexibility within limits. They can adapt to a range of conditions, but only when core needs are met. Adequate chill hours, balanced moisture, suitable soil, and sufficient sunlight remain essential. Variation occurs around these requirements, not in place of them. As trees continue to grow year after year, their responses to local conditions accumulate. Each season leaves subtle changes in structure, yield, and timing. Together, these changes form a pattern that reflects both the tree's biology and the environment in which it grows. Cherry trees continue to influence their surroundings in subtle but consistent ways as time passes. Beyond individual seasons, their presence shapes how land is used, how other plants establish nearby, and how living systems adjust around them. These effects are not dramatic or sudden. They accumulate slowly through repeated cycles of growth, leaf fall, and renewal. As cherry trees grow, their canopies create patterns of light and shade on the ground beneath them. During spring and summer, leaves filter sunlight, reducing direct exposure for plants growing below. This moderated light can support certain ground plants, while limiting others. Over time, this selective shading influences which species thrive near the base of the tree. The shallow root system of cherry trees also affects surrounding soil. Roots occupy the upper soil layers, where they compete with grasses and other plants for water and nutrients. This competition shapes plant communities close to the trunk, often creating zones where only certain species can persist. The tree's roots and surrounding vegetation adjust to each other over time. Leaf litter contributes steadily to soil structure. Each autumn, fallen leaves accumulate on the ground. As they decompose, they add organic matter to the soil. This process improves moisture retention and supports microbial activity. Microorganisms break down leaf material, releasing nutrients that become available to plant roots in the following growing season. As leaves break down, their material is returned to the soil. This supports long-term soil health around the tree. Healthy soil supports root function. This in turn supports canopy growth. Over years, this cycle can improve soil quality in areas where cherry trees are well established, particularly when the soil is not disturbed frequently. Cherry trees also interact with wildlife beyond pollinators and birds that feed on fruit. Insects use leaves as food sources and shelter. Some species feed directly on foliage, while others use the canopy as protection from predators. These insects become food for birds and other animals, connecting the tree to wider food networks. Birds respond to cherry trees at different times of year. During flowering, insects drawn to blossoms attract birds that feed on them. During fruiting, ripe cherries provide a concentrated food source. After fruit has fallen or been removed, birds may continue to use the tree for shelter or nesting. Fallen cherries contribute to this cycle as well. Fruit that drops before harvest becomes food for ground-dwelling animals and insects. As this material breaks down, it adds nutrients to the soil, supporting further plant growth. This movement of energy, from tree to wildlife and back into the soil, repeats each year. In orchards, these interactions occur alongside human management. Even in cultivated settings, cherry trees support complex food webs. Soil organisms, insects, birds, and mammals all respond to the presence of trees. Management practices influence how balanced these systems remain, but they do not remove them entirely. The presence of cherry trees can also affect microclimates. Canopies reduce wind speed near the ground and moderate temperature extremes. In summer, shaded areas remain cooler, reducing evaporation from the soil. In winter, trees can trap snow, insulating soil and roots from extreme cold. These microclimatic effects influence nearby plants and organisms by changing shade, wind exposure, and evaporation near the ground. Reduced wind and moderated temperatures create conditions that support certain species. Over time, these effects become part of the local landscape, shaping how the area functions as a whole. Cherry trees also influence how land is perceived and used. In agricultural settings, orchards structure space into rows and blocks that guide movement and management. In ornamental settings, trees define pathways, open spaces, and seasonal focal points. These uses change how people interact with the land, but remain rooted in the tree's physical presence. Over decades, the accumulation of seasonal cycles leaves visible traces. Branches thicken, trunks widen, and growth rings record the conditions of each year. These physical changes reflect how the tree has responded to water availability, temperature patterns, and soil conditions over time. Growth rings vary in width, depending on conditions during each growing season. Years with adequate water and favorable temperatures produce wider rings, while years of stress produce narrower ones. This record remains preserved within the wood, even as the tree continues to grow outward. Because cherry trees can live for many decades, they provide long-term continuity in a landscape. Their presence links past conditions with present ones. Trees planted years earlier continue to reflect earlier climate patterns while responding to current conditions. As trees age, their role may shift. Older trees may produce less fruit, but continue to support wildlife and contribute to soil health. Their canopies may become more irregular, creating varied light patterns. Even as productivity changes, ecological interactions persist. Management decisions influence how long these roles continue. Careful pruning, soil maintenance, and protection from damage help trees remain stable and functional over time. Neglect or repeated stress can shorten a tree's lifespan, reducing its contribution to the surrounding system. Cherry trees demonstrate how individual plants integrate into broader processes. Their growth connects soil, water, air, and living organisms in continuous exchange. These connections do not depend on a single season or event. They develop gradually through repetition. Each year adds another layer to this relationship. Leaves grow and fall, roots absorb and store resources, and organisms respond to available food and shelter. Over time, the tree becomes part of the structure of the place it occupies. Through these ongoing interactions, cherry trees shape their environment while being shaped by it. Their influence extends beyond blossoms and fruit, reaching into soil health, wildlife activity, and landscape structure. This steady exchange continues as long as the tree remains rooted and growing. Cherry trees operate within a clear set of physical limits. Their growth, flowering, and long-term stability depend on remaining within ranges of temperature, water, light, and soil conditions that the tree can tolerate. When conditions move toward the edges of those ranges, the tree's responses become visible in its structure and seasonal behavior. Temperature sets some of the most important boundaries. Cherry trees rely on winter cold to complete dormancy, but they are also sensitive to freezing temperatures once growth has resumed. When spring warmth arrives early, buds may begin to open before the risk of frost has passed. A sudden drop in temperature during this stage can damage flowers or young fruit, interrupting development before it fully begins. Cold injury during bloom affects the most delicate tissues of the tree. Blossoms exposed to freezing temperatures may fail to open properly, or internal structures may be damaged even when petals appear intact. When this happens, pollination and fertilization are disrupted, leading to reduced fruit formation. The tree may continue growing leaves and shoots, but the season's fruit potential has already been limited. Warm winters create a different kind of boundary. When temperatures do not remain low enough for long enough, chill hour requirements may not be met. Buds may remain partially dormant or respond unevenly as spring arrives. Some buds open early, others late, and some not at all. This uneven development affects flowering consistency and can carry forward into irregular fruit growth later in the season. Water availability creates another set of limits. Cherry trees depend on steady moisture to support leaf activity, fruit development, and internal transport of nutrients. When water becomes scarce, the tree reduces growth to protect itself. Leaves may produce less energy, and developing fruit may remain smaller because cell expansion slows without sufficient moisture. Extended drought places cumulative stress on the tree. Repeated seasons of limited water can reduce overall vigor, weaken branch growth, and limit the formation of healthy buds for future years. Because cherry trees rely on shallow roots, they respond quickly to dry conditions near the soil surface. This sensitivity makes them vulnerable during prolonged dry periods. Excess water also pushes the tree beyond its preferred range. Waterlogged soil restricts oxygen availability around the roots. Without sufficient oxygen, roots cannot function effectively, even when nutrients are present. This stress can appear suddenly after heavy rainfall or persist in poorly drained soils where water remains trapped. Soil compaction often worsens these effects. Compacted soil limits both air movement and water drainage. Roots may be unable to spread or function normally, increasing stress during both wet and dry conditions. Compaction can occur from repeated foot traffic, machinery, or natural settling, and its effects can last across multiple seasons. Light availability defines another boundary. Cherry trees grow best in full sun, where leaves receive enough light to produce energy efficiently. When trees are shaded by buildings, larger trees, or dense plantings, photosynthesis is reduced. This limits energy supply for growth, flowering, and fruit development, and can lead to uneven canopy performance. Within the tree itself, physical limits appear in how branches support weight. Cherry wood develops quickly and is strong, but it can also be brittle. When fruit loads become heavy, especially on long or poorly supported branches, the wood may bend or break. This reflects the balance between rapid growth and structural strength. Pruning helps keep growth within these physical limits. By shortening branches and distributing growth more evenly, pruning reduces leverage and weight concentration. This allows branches to support fruit without exceeding their structural capacity. Without pruning, repeated heavy loads increase the risk of breakage over time. Nutrient availability also defines limits. Cherry trees require balanced nutrition to support steady growth. When nutrients are lacking, leaf development and energy production decline. When nutrients, particularly nitrogen, are excessive, the tree may produce too much leafy growth. Excess foliage increases shading and disease risk while reducing energy allocation to fruit. Humidity influences the tree's ability to remain healthy. High humidity creates conditions that favor fungal disease, especially when airflow is limited. While humidity itself is not always damaging, it becomes a limiting factor when combined with dense canopies and prolonged moisture on leaves and branches. Dry climates reduce disease pressure, but introduce other limits. Reduced humidity often coincides with higher evaporation and greater water demand. In these conditions, maintaining adequate soil moisture becomes critical to prevent drought stress. The tree's performance reflects how well water supply remains within a workable range. Across seasons, repeated exposure to conditions near these limits leaves lasting effects. Growth rings may become narrower during stressful years, reflecting reduced growth. Branch patterns may become irregular where damage or stress occurred. These physical changes accumulate, recording how often the tree has been pushed beyond its optimal range. In cultivated settings, these responses guide long-term decisions. Growers observe which sites and practices keep trees within stable conditions and which lead to repeated stress. Adjustments in planting location, rootstock choice, pruning strategy, and water management are responses to these observed limits. Cherry trees show resilience when conditions return to normal. After short periods of stress, they can resume steady growth and production. However, when stress is repeated year after year without relief, vigor declines. Lifespan shortens, productivity decreases, and structural problems become more likely. Taken together, these patterns show that cherry trees tolerate a range of conditions, but they still have clear limits. They operate within defined tolerances that must be respected for long-term success. When climate, soil, water, and light remain within those tolerances, the tree's yearly pattern of growth and rest continues smoothly. When those limits are exceeded, the tree responds in visible ways. Flowering becomes irregular, fruit development is reduced, and growth patterns change. These responses are not sudden failures, but gradual signals that conditions are no longer aligned with the tree's needs. By observing these responses, the boundaries of suitable growing conditions become clear. Cherry trees thrive where those boundaries are respected and struggle where they are repeatedly crossed. Their structure and behavior reflect this balance, season after season. Cherry trees also reveal important patterns when viewed across multiple years rather than a single growing season. While individual stages such as flowering or fruiting draw attention, long-term behavior shows how the tree balances growth, recovery, and preparation over time. This broader view explains why consistency matters more than any one successful year. Each growing season contributes to the tree's overall condition. When conditions are favorable, the tree produces healthy leaves, forms strong wood, and sets buds for the following year. Energy produced during the season is not used all at once. A portion is stored in roots and woody tissue, where it remains available to support future growth and recovery. This stored energy plays a critical role in resilience. After a stressful season, such as one affected by drought or frost, the tree relies on reserves accumulated in previous years. These reserves allow basic functions to continue even when current conditions limit energy production. Trees that experience repeated stress without opportunities to rebuild reserves gradually lose this buffering capacity. Bud formation reflects this balance clearly. Buds that will open in the following spring are formed during the current growing season. Their number and quality depend on how much energy the tree can allocate after meeting immediate demands. When growth conditions are stable, buds form evenly along branches. When stress limits energy, fewer buds may form, or their development may be weaker. Over time, this affects flowering and fruiting patterns. A single poor year may reduce yield temporarily, but several poor years in sequence can change the tree's long-term productivity. Flowering may become less uniform, and fruit set may decline even when conditions improve. This delayed response reflects the cumulative nature of stress. Cherry trees record these patterns in their structure. Growth rings formed each year vary in width depending on available resources. Wider rings indicate seasons with adequate water, nutrients, and favorable temperatures. Narrow rings mark years when growth was limited. Because these rings accumulate, they provide a physical timeline of the tree's growing history. Branch structure also reflects long-term conditions. In years of strong growth, branches extend farther and thicken more quickly. In stressful years, growth slows, and branches may remain shorter or thinner. Over decades, these differences shape the overall form of the tree, revealing which period supported expansion and which constrained it. Recovery between seasons is just as important as performance during them. After fruiting, cherry trees continue producing leaves and storing energy until leaf drop. This late-season activity supports bud formation and strengthens wood. When autumn conditions remain favorable, recovery is more complete. Early cold or drought can shorten this recovery period, limiting preparation for winter. Dormancy allows the tree to pause without losing stored resources. During winter, metabolic activity remains low, conserving energy accumulated earlier. Buds stay sealed, and internal tissues are protected from freezing. This rest period is not wasted time. It preserves resources that will be mobilized quickly when growth resumes. Spring growth depends on the success of this preparation. When reserves are sufficient and buds are healthy, growth begins smoothly. Shoots elongate, leaves expand, and flowering occurs in a coordinated way. When reserves are low, growth may be delayed or uneven, even if external conditions are suitable. This link between past and present seasons explains why cherry trees benefit from consistent care. Management practices that support balanced growth help prevent large swings between years. Proper pruning avoids excessive energy loss while maintaining structure. Balanced nutrition supports steady leaf function without encouraging excessive growth. Water management also affects long-term stability. Consistent moisture supports both immediate growth and energy storage. Repeated cycles of drought, followed by recovery, place strain on the tree's internal systems. Over time, this strain reduces efficiency and increases vulnerability to other stressors. Soil health plays a central role in this process. Healthy soil supports root function year after year, allowing the tree to access water and nutrients reliably. Compacted or depleted soil limits recovery, even when other conditions improve. Because roots remain relatively shallow, soil condition has an immediate and lasting impact. As cherry trees age, their responses become more pronounced. Younger trees often recover more quickly from stress, using stored energy to rebuild. Older trees may respond more slowly, with reduced capacity to compensate for lost growth. This does not mean older trees cannot remain productive, but it does mean stability becomes more important than rapid change. Long-lived cherry trees show the results of many cycles of balance and imbalance. Their structure reflects years of growth and restraint, damage and repair. Branch patterns, trunk thickness, and ring structure together tell a story of adaptation to local conditions. In cultivated landscapes, understanding these patterns informs long-term planning. Decisions about planting density, pruning intensity, and resource management influence how trees perform, not just in the current season, but across decades. Trees that remain within their limits consistently tend to show steadier production and longer lifespans. Cherry trees demonstrate that productivity is not defined by peak output alone. It is shaped by the ability to sustain growth without exhausting resources. Trees that produce slightly less fruit each year, but remain healthy, often outperform those that alternate between heavy production and recovery. Across years, the yearly pattern of growth and rest repeats, but no two cycles are identical. Variations in weather, water, and temperature introduce differences that the tree must absorb and respond to. The way those responses accumulate determines long-term success. By observing cherry trees over many seasons, patterns emerge that are not visible in a single year. Growth reflects memory. Each season leaves traces that influence how the next begins. The tree's present condition is always connected to its past, because each season affects bud formation and stored reserves for the next. Cherry trees thrive best when change is gradual and conditions remain within workable ranges. Sudden extremes disrupt the balance, while steady patterns allow adaptation. Over time, the tree's structure becomes a record of this balance, showing how growth, rest, and recovery have been managed across years. Cherry trees also show clear patterns in how they interact with time across a single year. While long-term trends shape overall health, the sequence of events within one growing cycle determines how smoothly the tree moves from one stage to the next. Each phase depends closely on what came before it, creating a chain of cause and effect that repeats annually. The growing season begins with rapid activation. Once winter dormancy has been satisfied and temperatures rise, internal signals trigger movement of stored energy. Sugars and nutrients held in roots and woody tissue begin to move upward. This supports the opening of buds and the expansion of new shoots before leaves are fully functional. Early growth relies heavily on these stored reserves. At this stage, leaves are small and not yet producing much energy. The tree depends on what it saved during the previous season. This is why preparation in earlier months matters so much. Strong reserves allow growth to begin smoothly, even if early spring conditions are variable. As leaves expand, energy production increases. Photosynthesis becomes the primary source of fuel for continued growth. New shoots lengthen, and the canopy fills in. The tree shifts from relying on stored resources to generating energy in real time, supporting both structural growth and, in fruiting trees, the development of cherries. During this period, balance is important. Excessive shoot growth can draw energy away from other needs, while limited growth can restrict leaf area and reduce overall energy production. The tree's response reflects nutrient availability, water supply, and how much pruning occurred in previous seasons. As the season progresses, the tree must support multiple demands at once. Leaves must remain healthy and active. Branches must support weight. Roots must continue absorbing water and nutrients. These demands are linked. Stress in one area affects the others. A shortage of water, for example, reduces leaf activity and limits energy production. This then affects growth and fruit development. Mid-season conditions strongly influence outcomes. Stable weather allows steady growth and efficient use of resources. Extended periods of heat, drought, or humidity introduce strain. The tree responds by adjusting growth rates, reallocating resources, or shedding some demand, such as reducing fruit size or limiting new shoot growth. As fruit develops, if present, the tree continues balancing current needs with future preparation. Energy produced by the leaves supports both the growing fruit and the formation of buds for the next year. These buds begin forming while the current season is still underway, linking present conditions directly to future performance. Late summer and early autumn mark another shift. Growth begins to slow as daylight shortens and temperatures change. The tree starts redirecting resources away from expansion and towards storage. Sugars produced by the leaves move back into roots and woody tissue, replenishing reserves used earlier in the season. Leaves play a final role during this stage. Before falling, they transfer nutrients back into the tree. Chlorophyll breaks down, and other pigments become visible. This process allows the tree to conserve valuable materials rather than losing them when leaves drop. Efficient nutrient recovery supports stronger reserves going into winter. Leaf drop signals the end of active growth. Water demand decreases sharply, and the tree prepares for dormancy. Buds formed earlier are now fully set and sealed. Branches harden, and tissues become less responsive to short-term temperature changes. The tree enters a state designed to protect what has been built. Winter dormancy completes the cycle. Growth pauses, but internal systems remain organized and ready. Stored energy remains available, protected from cold damage. The duration and stability of this rest period influence how effectively the tree will restart growth when conditions improve. When winter conditions are consistent and chill hour requirements are met, the transition back into spring is smoother. Buds respond more uniformly, flowering is more coordinated, and early growth proceeds with fewer interruptions. When winter conditions are erratic, this transition becomes less predictable. Across this annual cycle, timing is critical. Each stage depends on the previous one finishing properly. Delays or disruptions accumulate. A poor spring affects summer growth. A stressed summer limits autumn storage. Weak storage reduces the strength of the following spring. Cherry trees show this dependence clearly. Their visible changes reflect internal timing mechanisms that respond to temperature, light, and moisture. These responses are not optional. They are built into how the tree functions, shaping the pace of the year. Management practices interact with this cycle at every stage. Pruning alters how energy is distributed. Water management influences growth rates. Soil condition affects root function. Each decision has effects that may not be fully visible until later stages of the season or even the following year. Because the cycle repeats, patterns emerge over time. Years with smooth transitions tend to produce steady growth and reliable flowering. Years with multiple disruptions show uneven development and reduced performance. The tree's structure records these patterns through growth rings and branch form. Understanding this seasonal sequence helps explain why cherry trees depend on consistency rather than perfection. They do not require ideal conditions at every moment, but they do require that each phase has enough support to complete its role before the next begins. The annual rhythm of cherry trees is therefore not a series of isolated events. It is a continuous process, with each stage preparing the ground for the next. When this rhythm remains intact, the tree moves through the year efficiently, conserving energy and maintaining balance. Over time, repeated cycles reinforce this pattern. The tree becomes well adapted to its environment when seasonal signals remain reliable. When signals shift, adjustments are required and stress increases. The tree's ability to manage this cycle determines how well it continues to grow and function. Cherry trees also reveal important patterns through the way individual parts of the tree coordinate with one another. Growth does not occur in isolation within a single branch or root. Each section of the tree responds to signals and resources shared across the entire structure. This coordination allows the tree to function as a connected system rather than a collection of separate parts. The movement of water links roots, trunk, branches, leaves, and fruit. Water absorbed by the roots travels upward through internal channels, reaching leaves where it supports photosynthesis and cooling. The same flow supplies developing fruit and growing tissues. When water availability changes, the entire tree responds, not just one area. Sugar movement follows a complementary path. Sugars produced in the leaves move through the tree to support growth wherever it is needed. Actively growing shoots, forming buds, developing fruit, and storage tissues all draw from this shared supply. The direction and amount of sugar movement shift depending on the season and the tree's priorities. During early growth, sugars move primarily toward expanding shoots and flowers. Later, as leaves are fully active, energy is shared between fruit development and the formation of buds for the next year. Toward the end of the season, sugars move back into roots and woody tissue for storage. This shifting flow reflects changing demands rather than fixed pathways. Roots respond to these changes as well. When energy supply is strong, roots grow and explore the soil, increasing the tree's ability to absorb water and nutrients. When energy is limited, root growth slows. Because cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow, their growth responds quickly to changes in surface soil conditions. Branches reflect coordination in another way. Growth at the tips of branches influences development elsewhere. Strong growth at one point can draw resources away from other areas, reducing their activity. Pruning alters this balance by removing certain growth points, redirecting energy toward remaining branches and buds. Leaf function is central to this coordination. Leaves are the primary sites of energy production, but their placement and exposure vary within the canopy. Leaves in full sun produce more energy than shaded leaves. This uneven production influences which branches grow more strongly and where buds develop more reliably. Airflow and light penetration within the canopy affect this balance. Well-spaced branches allow light to reach more leaves, distributing energy production more evenly. Dense canopies concentrate growth at the outer edges, leaving inner areas weaker. Over time, this pattern shapes the tree's form. Fruit development adds another layer of coordination. Developing cherries draw large amounts of water and sugars. When fruit load is heavy, other growth may slow as resources are redirected. Leaves near fruit clusters often become especially active, supporting nearby development more directly. This local support does not isolate the fruit from the rest of the tree. Resources can be moved across long distances within the structure. A branch with few leaves may still support fruit if energy is available elsewhere. This flexibility allows the tree to adjust to uneven conditions. Bud formation reflects coordination between current and future growth. Buds that will open the following spring form while the current season is still underway. Their development depends on available energy after immediate demands are met. If fruit load or shoot growth is excessive, fewer resources remain for bud formation. This relationship explains why balance matters. Trees that produce extremely heavy fruit loads one year may show reduced flowering the next. The tree has finite resources, and how they are allocated in one season influences what remains for the next. Coordination also appears in how the tree responds to stress. When water becomes limited, growth slows across the tree. Leaves may reduce activity, fruit may remain smaller, and root growth may pause. These changes happen together, reflecting a shared response rather than isolated failures. Temperature changes trigger coordinated responses as well. Rising temperatures in spring activate growth across the tree. Falling temperatures in autumn slow activity and redirect resources toward storage. Buds, leaves, and roots respond in sequence, guided by the same environmental cues. Because these responses are linked, disruptions can ripple through the system. Damage to roots limits water uptake, affecting leaves and fruit. Loss of leaf area reduces energy production, affecting root growth and bud formation. The tree compensates where possible, but repeated disruption reduces efficiency. Over time, coordination shapes the tree's structure. Branches that consistently receive sufficient resources thicken and strengthen. Weaker branches may grow slowly or die back. The resulting form reflects years of resource allocation shaped by environment and management. In managed settings, understanding this coordination guides care decisions. Pruning strategies aim to distribute growth points evenly. Water and nutrient management support consistent function across roots, leaves, and fruit. These practices work with the tree's internal coordination rather than against it. Cherry trees demonstrate that growth is not simply a matter of adding size each year. It is a process of distributing limited resources across competing needs. The tree's success depends on how effectively it manages this distribution over time. This coordination continues even during dormancy. Stored resources are held in specific tissues, ready to be mobilized when growth resumes. The location and amount of stored energy influence which buds open first and how strongly growth begins in spring. As the tree ages, coordination becomes more critical. Larger structures require more precise distribution of resources. Older trees often show more variation in growth strength across different areas, reflecting long-term patterns of allocation. Despite this complexity, the process remains orderly. Signals triggered by light, temperature, and internal status guide resource movement predictably. The tree does not choose where to grow. It responds according to physical conditions and internal balance. By observing how cherry trees coordinate growth across roots, trunk, branches, leaves, and fruit, the logic of their development becomes clearer. Each part contributes to the whole, and the whole shapes how each part functions. This interconnected structure allows cherry trees to adapt within limits. When conditions remain supportive, coordination maintains balance. When conditions become uneven, the tree adjusts distribution to protect core functions and prepare for recovery. Across seasons, this coordination repeats. Growth expands, resources shift, storage accumulates, and rest follows. The visible form of the tree reflects how successfully this coordination has been maintained over time. Cherry trees also demonstrate clear patterns in how they age and change over time. Age does not affect a tree in a single moment. It influences growth gradually, shaping structure, productivity, and resilience across decades. These changes are visible in the way branches form, how the canopy fills out, and how the tree responds to seasonal demands. Young cherry trees focus much of their energy on establishing structure. In the early years, growth is directed toward building a stable trunk and a framework of branches. Leaves expand quickly, and shoots lengthen as the tree increases its reach. During this stage, fruit production is limited or absent, as resources are prioritized for growth rather than reproduction. As cherry trees approach maturity, their growth pattern shifts. Fruiting varieties typically reach maturity between 4 and 7 years. At this point, the tree has developed sufficient structure to support fruit production while continuing to grow. Energy allocation becomes more balanced, supporting both vegetative growth and fruit development. Once mature, cherry trees can produce fruit for decades. Annual growth continues, but it is more controlled. Branches thicken rather than extend dramatically, and the canopy becomes more stable in shape. The tree's energy is divided between maintaining existing structure, producing fruit, and forming buds for future seasons. With age, cherry trees develop stronger wood, but the characteristics of that wood remain important. Cherry wood is dense and smooth, yet it can be brittle. As branches grow thicker and carry repeated fruit loads, structural stress accumulates. Older branches may be more prone to breakage, especially if growth has been uneven or pruning has been neglected. The weight of fruit plays a role in how aging branches respond. Heavy fruit loads place repeated strain on the same sections of wood year after year. Over time, this can weaken attachment points and alter branch angles. Proper management helps reduce this strain by distributing fruiting wood more evenly throughout the canopy. Root systems also change with age. While cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow, they expand outward over time, occupying a larger area of soil. This wider reach allows older trees to access more water and nutrients, but it also increases their dependence on soil health across a broader area. Soil conditions therefore become increasingly important as trees age. Compacted or depleted soil limits the ability of older root systems to function efficiently. When soil structure remains healthy, roots continue to support the canopy and fruiting demands. When soil quality declines, older trees may show reduced vigor, even if above-ground care remains consistent. Leaf function evolves as well. Older trees may produce leaves that are slightly less efficient than those of younger trees, especially if stress has accumulated over time. This does not stop photosynthesis, but it can reduce overall energy production. As a result, older trees may rely more heavily on stored reserves to support seasonal transitions. Bud formation reflects these changes. In younger trees, bud formation is often vigorous and evenly distributed. In older trees, bud development may become more variable, influenced by branch age, light exposure, and past stress. This can lead to uneven flowering and fruiting patterns across the canopy. Age also affects how cherry trees recover from stress. Younger trees often rebound quickly after drought, frost, or disease. Older trees may recover more slowly, requiring longer periods of favorable conditions to rebuild reserves. This difference reflects changes in energy storage capacity and structural flexibility. Despite these shifts, older cherry trees can remain productive when conditions are stable. Many continue to flower and fruit reliably for decades. Their performance depends less on rapid growth and more on maintaining balance. Consistent care becomes more important than aggressive intervention. Pruning strategies often change as trees age. In younger trees, pruning focuses on shaping structure and encouraging growth. In older trees, pruning aims to maintain existing structure, remove weakened wood, and improve airflow and light penetration. These adjustments help reduce stress and support continued function. Water and nutrient needs also shift gradually. Older trees may require careful monitoring to ensure roots continue receiving adequate moisture without becoming waterlogged. Balanced nutrition supports leaf function and fruit development without encouraging excessive growth that could strain aging branches. The visible form of an older cherry tree reflects its history. Branch angles, trunk thickness, and canopy shape show how growth and stress have interacted over time. Growth rings within the wood record these patterns internally, preserving a detailed record of favorable and challenging years. Over decades, aging cherry trees become more sensitive to extremes. Sudden changes in climate or management can have greater impact than they would on younger trees. Gradual adjustments allow older trees to adapt more successfully, maintaining stability rather than rapid change. These age-related patterns explain why long-lived cherry trees are usually found in environments with consistent conditions. Trees that experience moderate, predictable seasons tend to age more smoothly than those exposed to frequent extremes. Stability supports longevity. Cherry trees that reach advanced age often contribute in ways beyond fruit production. Their canopies support wildlife, their roots stabilize soil, and their presence shapes the surrounding landscape. Even as productivity changes, ecological roles remain significant. Through each stage of life, from early establishment to maturity and gradual aging, cherry trees adjust how they allocate resources and respond to their environment. Age does not represent decline alone. It represents a shift in priorities, from building structure to maintaining balance. This progression allows cherry trees to persist across decades. When care and conditions remain aligned with their needs, they continue cycling through growth, flowering, fruiting, and dormancy, adapting their responses as they age. Cherry trees also reflect clear patterns in how they occupy space and relate to the landscapes around them. Their growth is not only vertical or outward, it is shaped by spacing, neighboring plants, and the physical limits of the environment in which they are placed. Over time, these spatial relationships influence tree health, productivity, and longevity. Spacing between cherry trees affects how light, air, and resources are shared. When trees are planted too closely, canopies may overlap, reducing sunlight reaching inner branches. Shaded areas produce less energy. This weakens growth and increases disease risk. Adequate spacing allows each tree to develop a balanced canopy with more uniform exposure. Air movement is also shaped by spacing. Trees planted with sufficient distance between them allow wind to move through the canopy more freely. This airflow helps leaves dry after rain and reduces the humidity that supports fungal disease. In dense plantings, still air and prolonged moisture increase disease pressure over time. Cherry trees compete with nearby plants for water and nutrients. Because their roots remain relatively shallow, they share the same soil layers used by grasses, shrubs, and other trees. When competition is intense, cherry trees may experience reduced access to moisture and nutrients, especially during dry periods. In managed settings, this competition is often controlled by clearing vegetation beneath and around the trees. Reducing competing plants allows more water and nutrients to reach the tree's roots. Mulching further limits competition, while stabilizing soil moisture and temperature near the surface. Neighboring trees influence growth patterns as well. Cherry trees growing near taller trees may experience partial shading during parts of the day. This uneven light exposure can lead to asymmetric growth, with branches extending more strongly toward available light. Over time, this affects canopy shape and balance. The surrounding landscape also affects microclimate. Trees planted near slopes, walls, or buildings may experience differences in temperature and airflow compared to those in open areas. Cold air tends to settle in low-lying areas, increasing frost risk. Elevated or gently sloped sites often warm earlier in spring and drain cold air more effectively. Wind exposure varies across landscapes. In open areas, cherry trees may experience stronger winds that stress branches and increase water loss through leaves. In sheltered areas, reduced wind may increase humidity and disease risk. The balance between protection and airflow influences long-term tree health. Soil depth and structure vary spatially as well. Even within a single orchard, soil conditions can change over short distances. Shallow or compacted areas limit root expansion, while deeper, well-structured soil supports more vigorous growth. Trees respond to these differences with variations in size and productivity. Over time, these spatial factors leave visible marks on the tree. Branch distribution reflects light availability. Trunk thickness reflects resource access. Root systems expand unevenly in response to soil conditions and competition. Each tree becomes shaped by its specific location. Cherry trees also influence the spaces around them. Their canopies create shaded zones that affect understory plants. Leaf drop contributes organic matter across a defined area. Roots stabilize soil, reducing erosion and altering water movement. These effects shape the local environment gradually. In cultivated landscapes, spacing and layout are adjusted to balance yield and manageability. Closer spacing increases the number of trees per area, but requires more precise management. Wider spacing reduces competition and disease pressure, but uses more land. These choices influence how trees interact with space over decades. As trees grow larger, spatial constraints become more important. Branches may extend into walkways or neighboring plantings. Roots may encounter barriers or compacted zones. Managing these interactions becomes part of long-term care, guiding pruning and soil maintenance decisions. In naturalized settings, cherry trees integrate into existing plant communities. Their success depends on how well they fit into available space, without overwhelming or being overwhelmed by other species. Trees that establish in suitable positions tend to persist, while those placed poorly may struggle. Across seasons, spatial relationships remain relatively constant, even as growth continues. The tree adapts to the space it occupies, adjusting branch angles and growth patterns to available light and air. This adaptation shapes the mature form of the tree. Cherry trees demonstrate that growth is always influenced by place. Their biology provides the potential for development, but the surrounding environment determines how that potential is expressed. Space, competition, and microclimate guide the final outcome. By observing how cherry trees occupy and shape space, it becomes clear that successful growth depends on alignment between the tree and its surroundings. When space and conditions are well matched, growth remains balanced and resilient over time. Cherry trees also show clear patterns in how they respond to human use and long-term management choices. Whether grown in orchards, gardens, or shared landscapes, their growth reflects repeated decisions made over many years. These decisions shape structure, productivity, and resilience in ways that become more apparent as time passes. In cultivated settings, cherry trees are guided from an early age. Planting location determines soil drainage, sunlight exposure, and airflow. These initial choices influence how the tree establishes its roots and canopy. A well-chosen site supports steady growth from the beginning, while a poorly chosen site can limit development for the life of the tree. Training during early years affects long-term structure. Young cherry trees are shaped to form a framework of branches that can support future growth. Branch angles, spacing, and height are guided to reduce stress and improve light distribution. These early adjustments reduce the need for heavy correction later. As trees mature, maintenance becomes the primary focus. Pruning is used to preserve structure rather than create it. Removing damaged or overcrowded branches helps maintain airflow and light penetration. Over time, consistent pruning prevents the canopy from becoming too dense or unbalanced. Water management reflects long-term planning as well. Irrigation practices are adjusted to meet the tree's needs without encouraging excessive growth. Consistent moisture supports leaf activity and fruit development, while allowing roots to function efficiently. Sudden changes in water supply can disrupt this balance, leading to stress responses that persist across seasons. Nutrient management follows a similar pattern. Balanced fertilization supports steady growth without pushing the tree beyond its structural limits. Excess nutrients, particularly nitrogen, promote leafy growth that can weaken branches and increase disease risk. Under-fertilization limits growth and reduces energy production. Long-term stability depends on moderation. Cherry trees also respond to protection measures used over time. Netting to reduce bird damage, for example, allows fruit to remain on the tree until harvest. Repeated use of protective measures shapes how fruiting patterns develop, influencing where fruit clusters are most successful and how branches respond to load. Disease management decisions leave lasting effects. Preventative care that reduces disease pressure allows trees to allocate energy toward growth rather than recovery. Repeated disease outbreaks weaken trees gradually, even when each event seems minor. Over years, this cumulative stress becomes visible in reduced vigor. Human use also influences how trees interact with their surroundings. In orchards, regular access for harvesting and maintenance affects soil compaction and root health. Careful management of traffic patterns helps preserve soil structure. In unmanaged settings, repeated foot traffic can compact soil and limit root function. Pruning intensity over time shapes how trees age. Trees pruned consistently and moderately tend to maintain balanced structure. Trees subjected to heavy pruning, followed by long periods without care, often develop uneven growth, with weak attachment points and irregular canopies. Taken together, these observations persist and influence future management needs. Cherry trees also reflect cultural preferences in how they are maintained. Ornamental trees may be pruned to emphasize form and flowering display, while fruiting trees are managed to optimize yield and accessibility. These differing goals influence branch structure, height, and density, even though the underlying biology remains the same. Long-term management choices affect how trees handle stress. Trees that receive consistent care recover more quickly from drought, frost, or pest pressure. Trees that experience irregular care show delayed or uneven recovery. This difference becomes more pronounced as trees age. Over decades, these management patterns become embedded in the tree's structure. Growth rings reflect periods of steady care or neglect. Branch architecture shows where pruning guided growth or where branches competed unchecked. The visible form of the tree becomes a record of human interaction. Cherry trees demonstrate that management is not a one-time action. It is a repeated process that shapes outcomes gradually. Each season adds another layer to the tree's response. Small adjustments made consistently have greater impact than occasional major interventions. In shared landscapes, management decisions affect how trees coexist with people. Trees that are allowed to grow too large may interfere with paths or structures, leading to later stress from heavy pruning. Trees maintained with their surroundings in mind tend to integrate more smoothly and experience fewer disruptions. As trees approach older age, the effects of long-term management become more pronounced. Well-managed trees often remain productive and stable for many decades. Poorly managed trees may decline earlier, even if they appear healthy in early years. Taken together, these observations highlight the importance of foresight. Decisions made during planting and early growth influence decades of development. Later adjustments can correct some issues, but they cannot fully undo early limitations. Cherry trees respond to care in predictable ways. When management aligns with their biological needs, growth remains balanced. When care pushes them beyond those needs, stress accumulates. Observing these responses helps refine future practices. Across landscapes and generations, cherry trees show how human involvement becomes part of their growth story. Their form, productivity, and longevity reflect not only climate and soil, but also the consistency and quality of care they receive over time. Through steady, informed management, cherry trees can continue their seasonal cycles with fewer disruptions. Their long-term health depends on maintaining balance rather than maximizing output in any single year. Cherry trees also show distinct patterns in how they respond to interruption and recovery. No growing season is perfectly smooth, and trees routinely encounter stress from weather, pests, or temporary shortages of resources. What matters over time is not the absence of disruption, but how the tree absorbs disturbance and resumes its normal rhythm. Short-term disruptions often occur during active growth. A brief drought, a cold snap, or a period of excessive rain can interrupt development. When this happens, cherry trees adjust by slowing growth in the most demanding areas. Shoot extension may pause, fruit expansion may slow, and leaf activity may become more conservative. These changes reduce immediate demand and protect essential functions. Once conditions improve, growth can resume. Leaves increase activity as water and temperature return to suitable ranges. Shoots may extend again, and fruit development may continue if the interruption was brief. This ability to pause and restart allows cherry trees to cope with variable conditions within a single season. Recovery depends on reserves built earlier. Stored energy in roots and woody tissue supports basic processes during disruption. Trees that entered the season with strong reserves recover more smoothly than those already operating near their limits. This connection links current recovery to past growing conditions. Not all interruptions affect the tree evenly. Damage to leaves reduces energy production directly, while damage to roots limits water and nutrient uptake. Loss of flowers or fruit affects reproduction, but may reduce overall strain, allowing the tree to redirect resources toward growth and storage. The tree adjusts priorities depending on which parts are affected. Repeated interruptions create cumulative effects. A single year of stress may leave little trace if followed by favorable conditions. Several difficult seasons in sequence reduce vigor more noticeably. Growth rings may narrow, branch extension may slow, and bud formation may decline. These changes reflect a gradual shift rather than sudden failure. Cherry trees also recover unevenly across their structure. Some branches may resume strong growth, while others remain weak. Areas with better light exposure or closer access to resources often recover first. This uneven recovery can alter canopy balance, creating differences in branch strength and productivity. Pruning plays a role in guiding recovery. Removing damaged or weakened branches allows the tree to concentrate resources on healthier tissue. By reducing demand, pruning supports more complete recovery across remaining branches. Timing matters, as pruning during periods of active recovery can influence how growth is redistributed. Root recovery is equally important. After periods of waterlogging or compaction, root function may be impaired even when surface conditions improve. Roots require time and favorable soil conditions to regenerate fine root structures responsible for absorption. Recovery above ground often depends on this slower process below ground. Seasonal timing influences recovery outcomes. Stress early in the growing season can limit total growth potential for that year, even if conditions improve later. Stress late in the season may have less immediate impact, but can reduce energy storage, affecting the following spring. The tree's response depends on when disruption occurs. Cherry trees also respond differently depending on age. Younger trees often recover more quickly, as they allocate a larger share of energy toward growth. Older trees may recover more slowly, especially if reserves are limited or structural stress has accumulated. This difference shapes how long-term performance changes with age. Environmental stability supports recovery. Trees growing in sites with consistent soil moisture, good drainage, and adequate sunlight recover more reliably after stress. Trees in marginal sites experience slower or incomplete recovery, increasing vulnerability to future disruptions. Over time, recovery patterns influence overall form. Branches that recover repeatedly thicken and strengthen. Branches that experience repeated interruption may remain thin or die back. The resulting structure reflects a history of stress and recovery rather than a single defining event. Cherry trees demonstrate flexibility within limits. They can absorb moderate disruption and return to steady growth when conditions allow. However, recovery requires time and supportive conditions. When disruptions occur too frequently or recovery is incomplete, long-term decline becomes more likely. Taken together, these observations explain why consistency matters more than intensity. A season of heavy fruiting followed by strong recovery can be sustainable. Repeated seasons of stress without recovery gradually weaken the tree. The balance between disturbance and restoration determines long-term outcomes. In managed landscapes, recovery is supported through deliberate choices. Adjusting irrigation after drought, improving drainage after flooding, and restoring soil structure after compaction all help trees regain function. These interventions work best when applied promptly and consistently. Cherry trees record recovery as clearly as they record stress. Growth rings widen again after favorable seasons. Bud formation improves when reserves are restored. Canopy balance gradually returns as resources are redistributed. These changes signal that recovery has taken place. Over many years, the tree's appearance reflects this ongoing process. A healthy tree shows evidence of past stress, but continues to function effectively. A declining tree shows increasing signs of incomplete recovery, such as reduced growth, uneven canopy, or diminished flowering. Through repeated cycles of interruption and recovery, cherry trees reveal how resilience operates in practice. It is not the absence of stress that defines success, but the capacity to recover and rebuild before the next challenge arrives. As long as recovery periods remain sufficient, the tree can continue its yearly pattern of growth and rest. Growth resumes, reserves accumulate, and the cycle repeats. When recovery is shortened or prevented, the rhythm becomes irregular, and long-term stability declines. Cherry trees also reveal broader patterns when their many traits are considered together rather than in isolation. By this stage, the details of growth, flowering, fruiting, aging, and recovery form a connected picture. The tree's behavior across seasons reflects how these elements interact, shaping a stable rhythm that repeats year after year. At the center of this rhythm is the relationship between structure and timing. Branches, roots, leaves, and buds are not independent features. Their development is coordinated so that demands placed on the tree at one moment are supported by preparation made earlier. Winter dormancy protects tissues, spring growth draws on stored energy, summer activity builds reserves, and autumn recovery sets the conditions for the next cycle. This coordination explains why cherry trees respond so clearly to changes in climate. Temperature patterns influence chill hour accumulation, bloom timing, and the pace of growth. Water availability affects leaf function, fruit size, and energy storage. Light exposure shapes canopy balance and bud development. Each factor influences the others through physical processes rather than isolated responses. The visible features of cherry trees reflect this integration. Blossoms appear before leaves because energy has been stored in advance. Fruit develops rapidly because leaves expand soon after flowering. Growth slows in late summer because energy is redirected toward storage. Leaf drop reduces water demand as winter approaches. Each stage prepares for what follows. When conditions are stable, this sequence unfolds smoothly. Flowering is even, growth is balanced, and recovery is complete. When conditions shift, the sequence adjusts. Flowering may be uneven, growth may slow, or storage may be reduced. The tree does not stop functioning, but the rhythm becomes less precise. Across regions, this rhythm adapts to local patterns. In cooler climates, longer winters ensure chill requirements are met, but growing seasons may be shorter. In warmer regions, growth may begin earlier, but face greater risk from insufficient winter cold. These differences influence how the same biological processes play out in different environments. The distinction between fruiting and ornamental cherry trees also fits within this broader view. Fruiting trees direct more resources toward fruit development, while ornamental trees emphasize flowering display. Despite these differences, both rely on the same underlying processes of dormancy, bud formation, and seasonal timing. Their different uses do not change their basic needs. Cherry trees also illustrate how productivity and longevity are linked. Heavy fruiting places demands on branches, roots, and energy reserves. When balanced by adequate recovery, this demand can be sustained over many years. When recovery is incomplete, productivity declines. Longevity depends on maintaining this balance rather than maximizing output in any single season. This balance is visible in growth rings and branch structure. Years with favorable conditions produce wider rings and stronger growth. Stressful years leave narrower rings and slower extension. Over time, these variations form a record of how the tree has navigated its environment. The tree's interactions with other organisms reinforce this pattern. Pollinators rely on timely flowering. Birds and insects respond to fruit availability and canopy structure. Soil organisms process leaf litter and support nutrient cycling. These interactions depend on the tree maintaining its yearly pattern of growth and rest. When the rhythm shifts, the surrounding system adjusts as well. Human management becomes part of this integrated system. Pruning alters structure and resource distribution. Irrigation influences growth and storage. Soil care affects root function. Each intervention interacts with the tree's natural processes, supporting or disrupting the rhythm depending on timing and intensity. Consistency in care supports predictability in growth. Trees managed with steady practices tend to show fewer extremes between years. Their flowering and fruiting become more reliable, and their recovery more complete. Inconsistent care introduces variability that can compound environmental stress. As cherry trees age, integration becomes more important. Older trees rely more on balance than rapid growth. Their ability to maintain structure, support fruit, and recover from stress depends on how well resources are distributed across the tree. Sudden changes become harder to absorb, while gradual adjustments are more easily accommodated. The visible seasonal cycle remains familiar. Winter dormancy gives way to spring bloom, followed by leaf expansion, summer growth, and autumn leaf drop. What changes with time is how smoothly these transitions occur. Trees that remain well aligned with their environment continue this cycle with minimal disruption. Across decades, the cherry tree becomes a record of these interactions. Its form reflects climate patterns, soil conditions, and management history. Branch angles show past pruning decisions. Trunk thickness shows years of growth and restraint. Growth rings preserve a timeline of environmental variation. This broader view shows that cherry trees are not defined by any single trait. Their blossoms, fruit, wood, and lifespan all emerge from the same set of processes responding to external conditions. Understanding one aspect requires considering how it fits into the whole. When these processes remain aligned, cherry trees function efficiently. Energy is stored and used at the right times. Growth and reproduction proceed without exhausting reserves. Recovery follows stress before damage becomes cumulative. The rhythm remains intact. When alignment is disrupted repeatedly, signs appear. Flowering becomes irregular. Growth slows. Structural weaknesses develop. These changes are gradual, reflecting the cumulative nature of imbalance rather than sudden failure. Cherry trees therefore offer a clear example of how biological systems depend on timing and integration. Their success does not come from any single advantage, but from the coordination of many small processes working together across time. By observing cherry trees across seasons and years, these patterns become visible. What appears simple at first glance reveals a complex sequence of preparation, response, and recovery. This complexity remains grounded in physical processes that repeat reliably when conditions allow. As this broader picture comes into focus, the cherry tree's yearly pattern of growth and rest can be seen not as isolated events, but as a continuous cycle shaped by environment, structure, and time. Each year adds another layer to this pattern, reinforcing the connection between growth and conditions. Cherry trees also show clear patterns in how they settle into familiarity with their surroundings over time. As seasons repeat, the tree's responses become increasingly efficient. Growth, flowering, and recovery no longer require adjustment to new conditions. Instead, they follow pathways shaped by repeated exposure and established structure. Once a cherry tree has grown for many years in the same place, its root system has explored the available soil. Roots occupy zones that consistently provide moisture and nutrients. Water uptake becomes predictable, and the tree adjusts its growth to what the soil can reliably supply. Sudden changes still matter, but the baseline remains stable. The canopy reflects this familiarity. Branches have adjusted their angles and length in response to light patterns that repeat each year. Areas that consistently receive sunlight support stronger growth. Shaded sections grow more slowly or remain sparse. Over time, the canopy becomes shaped by the daily and seasonal movement of light. Bud placement reflects long-term conditions as well. Buds tend to form more reliably on branches that receive sufficient light and support steady growth. In familiar environments, flowering becomes more evenly distributed, provided conditions remain within the tree's tolerances. This regularity supports predictable flowering and fruiting patterns. Energy movement becomes more efficient with repetition. The pathways that transport water and sugars strengthen through repeated use. Stored reserves accumulate in predictable locations, allowing rapid mobilization when growth resumes. The tree no longer needs to adapt its internal distribution each season because the demands remain similar. This efficiency reduces stress. When growth follows familiar patterns, fewer resources are wasted on adjustment. The tree does not need to redirect growth constantly or compensate for unpredictable conditions. As a result, overall energy balance improves, supporting longevity. Seasonal timing also stabilizes. Flowering occurs within a narrower window, and growth phases follow one another more smoothly. While year-to-year variation still occurs due to weather, the underlying sequence remains consistent. This consistency supports reliable interactions with pollinators and surrounding organisms. Cherry trees that remain in familiar environments often show fewer structural problems. Branches strengthen along established load paths. Wood thickens where weight is consistently supported. Weak or unnecessary growth is gradually reduced, either through pruning or natural dieback. Roots follow a similar pattern. Fine roots renew within established zones rather than expanding unpredictably. This supports efficient absorption and reduces exposure to poor soil conditions. Familiar soil structure allows roots to function without repeated stress from compaction or saturation. Recovery from disturbance also improves with familiarity. Trees that have experienced similar stresses before often respond more smoothly. If drought occurs, the tree draws on known reserves. If frost damages some buds, growth resumes along established branches. Past experience shapes present response. This does not make the tree immune to stress. Extreme conditions can still disrupt growth. However, within moderate ranges, familiarity reduces the cost of adjustment. The tree conserves energy by relying on established patterns rather than improvising new ones each season. Human management interacts with this familiarity. Trees that receive consistent pruning, irrigation, and soil care develop predictable responses. Sudden changes in management can disrupt this balance, forcing the tree to reallocate resources in less efficient ways. The visible form of a mature cherry tree reflects this settled state. Branch spacing appears deliberate, canopy density is balanced, growth increments become more uniform. These features indicate that the tree is operating within conditions it understands and can manage. This state supports long-term productivity. Trees that function efficiently tend to maintain steadier fruiting and flowering over many years. They avoid extremes of heavy production followed by exhaustion. Instead, output remains within sustainable limits. Familiarity also affects how the tree responds to aging. As growth slows naturally with age, established pathways help maintain function without strain. Older trees rely more on efficiency than expansion, and familiarity supports this shift. The surrounding ecosystem responds as well. Pollinators encounter reliable flowering patterns. Birds and insects adjust to predictable canopy structure. Soil organisms benefit from consistent litter input and root activity. These relationships reinforce stability. Across seasons, the tree's rhythm becomes less variable. Changes still occur, but they are layered onto a stable foundation. This stability allows the tree to persist through minor disruptions without losing overall balance. Cherry trees that reach this stage often show few outward signs of stress. Growth appears measured rather than urgent. Leaves function steadily. Branches support weight without excessive strain. The tree's behavior reflects confidence rather than tension. This settled state emerges only after years of alignment between tree and environment. It cannot be rushed. It develops through repeated cycles of growth, response, and recovery within the same conditions. When alignment is broken, such as through sudden environmental change or major management shifts, the tree must adjust again. Efficiency decreases temporarily as new patterns are established. Stability returns only when conditions become predictable once more. Cherry trees demonstrate how familiarity shapes biological function. Repetition reduces cost. Established structure supports efficient use of resources. Over time, the tree's responses become refined rather than reactive. This refinement allows the tree to maintain its seasonal cycle with minimal disruption. Growth resumes each spring, activity continues through summer, reserves build in autumn, and dormancy protects through winter. The sequence feels natural because it has been repeated many times before. As years pass, the tree's form records this familiarity. The balance between growth and restraint, expansion and stability becomes visible. The tree's presence reflects not only its biology, but its long relationship with the place it occupies. Cherry trees reach a point where their patterns of growth, response, and stability are well established. By this stage, the processes that govern their behavior are no longer developing or adjusting rapidly. Instead, they operate in a settled way, repeating familiar sequences that have been reinforced over many seasons. What remains is the continuation of these processes across time, shaped by the same physical conditions that guided the tree from the beginning. At full maturity, the cherry tree's structure reflects years of accumulated decisions made by climate, soil, and management. Branches have thickened along paths that consistently carried weight. Areas that received reliable sunlight support, steady growth, while shaded sections remain less active. The canopy shows balance rather than urgency, with growth distributed in a way that the tree can sustain. Root systems mirror this stability. Although cherry tree roots remain relatively shallow, they occupy soil zones that have proven dependable for moisture and nutrients. Fine roots renew within these zones year after year, supporting efficient absorption without unnecessary expansion. This established pattern reduces stress during normal seasonal variation. Seasonal timing continues to follow the same framework. Winter dormancy protects stored resources. Spring growth draws on reserves before leaves take over energy production. Summer activity maintains structure and, in fruiting trees, supports crop development. Autumn recovery rebuilds reserves and prepares buds for the following year. Each stage follows the last without requiring new adjustment. The tree's interaction with its environment also becomes predictable. Pollinators encounter flowering within expected windows. Birds and insects respond to familiar canopy structure and food availability. Soil organisms continue processing leaf litter and supporting nutrient cycling. These repeated interactions reinforce stability in the surrounding system. Productivity at this stage depends on balance rather than intensity. Fruiting trees that remain healthy often produce consistent yields rather than extreme variation. Branches support fruit without repeated damage. Recovery after harvest is sufficient to maintain reserves. Longevity is supported by avoiding repeated strain. Structural limits remain important. Cherrywood continues to be strong but brittle, requiring ongoing the way growth is matched to what branches and roots can physically support. Heavy fruit loads are carried by branches that have thickened over time. Pruning remains focused on maintaining this balance rather than reshaping the tree. Environmental conditions continue to leave their mark. Growth rings widen or narrow depending on water availability and temperature patterns. These internal records accumulate quietly, preserving evidence of favorable and challenging years alike. The trunk becomes a layered record of how conditions have shifted over time. Climate continues to influence timing. Changes in winter cold or spring warmth alter flowering windows. Shifts in rainfall affect growth and recovery. Mature trees respond within the limits of their established structure, adjusting where possible and showing stress where limits are exceeded. Human management remains part of this ongoing process. Consistent care supports stability, while abrupt changes force adjustment. Trees that receive steady pruning, balanced nutrition, and appropriate water tend to maintain function longer than those exposed to irregular intervention. As the tree ages further, growth slows naturally. Expansion gives way to maintenance. The focus shifts toward preserving structure and sustaining core functions. Leaves continue producing energy, roots continue absorbing resources, and buds continue forming, but at a measured pace. This slower rhythm does not represent decline by itself. It reflects efficiency. The tree no longer needs rapid growth to establish itself. Its success lies in maintaining balance, conserving energy, and repeating its seasonal cycle with minimal disruption. Across years, the visible changes become subtle. Branch extension is modest. Canopy shape changes gradually. Productivity remains within a stable range. These characteristics indicate that the tree is operating comfortably within its environment. The surrounding landscape responds to this stability. Soil conditions remain relatively consistent. Wildlife interactions follow predictable patterns. The tree becomes part of the long-term structure of the place it occupies, rather than a changing feature. As seasons continue to repeat, the cherry tree's presence becomes familiar. Its behavior aligns closely with temperature, light, and moisture patterns that return each year. Variation still occurs, but it is layered onto a stable foundation built over time. At this point, attention naturally shifts away from individual stages and toward continuity. The same physical processes continue cycling, linking past seasons to future ones. Growth, rest, and recovery remain connected, each dependent on the others. The cherry tree does not move toward an endpoint so much as it continues within a pattern. Each year adds another repetition, reinforcing pathways that have proven effective. The tree persists by maintaining alignment rather than seeking change. In the final stages of the growing season, activity gradually slows. Leaves complete their work and begin transferring resources back into the tree. Buds formed earlier remain sealed and protected. The canopy prepares once again for leaf drop and rest. As leaves fall and branches are exposed, water demand decreases. Internal movement slows. The tree enters dormancy with reserves stored and structure intact. The visible world becomes quieter, while internal systems remain organized and ready. Winter brings stillness, but not absence. The tree holds what it has gathered, protected from cold by dormancy. The conditions that shaped growth earlier now shape rest, completing the cycle once more. When spring eventually returns, the same sequence will begin again. Buds will respond to warmth. Growth will resume along familiar paths. The rhythm will repeat, shaped by the same physical rules that have guided the tree for decades. This continuity defines the cherry tree more than any single feature. Blossoms, fruit, wood, and form all emerge from the repetition of these processes across time. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you have enjoyed spending time learning about the cherry tree